In a world where faith meets the impossible, St. Paraskeva emerges. Born in Epivates in the year 1020, she faced trials that tested her devotion. She renounced wealth, survived the harsh desert of Jordan, and dedicated her entire life to God. When all seemed lost, a miracle changed everything. Her incorrupt body, emanating the scent of flowers, revealed the power of hope and the true meaning of holiness. The sun was still just a promise on the horizon when little Paraskeva woke up that autumn morning. The year was 1030, and the world awakening in Epivates, on the shores of the Sea of Marmara, was a mosaic of cultures and beliefs under the vast mantle of the Byzantine Empire. The village, just a few miles from Constantinople, breathed in the salty sea air and lived in rhythm with the tides and seasons. Each day was marked by the sound of church bells and the voices of merchants in the small marketplace. The first rays of light slipped through the cracks of the wooden window shutters, casting golden bands across the polished stone floor of the noble house where Paraskeva was raised. The daughter of wealthy and devout parents, the 10-year-old girl slid her bare feet over the cold floor and walked to the window. As she opened the shutters, light flooded the room, and her dark eyes took in the awakening village. "Paraskeva!" Her mother's voice echoed through the hallway. "Come, daughter, it's time for Mass." The smell of freshly baked bread filled the house as servants moved silently, preparing the family's breakfast. Paraskeva was different from other children her age. While many groaned about waking early for religious duties, she looked forward to those moments. There was a stillness in church that spoke to her soul in a way she couldn't quite explain with her childlike words. The family walked to church in respectful silence. Her father, a prosperous and respected merchant, led the way, followed by her mother, who occasionally glanced back at her daughter with a warm smile. Paraskeva observed everything with keen eyes: the flight of seabirds across the brightening sky, the dance of dry leaves on the cobblestone streets, the distant murmur of waves crashing on the shore. To her, every detail of creation was a divine love letter, written for anyone with eyes to see. The stone church, with its modest yet commanding domes, stood like a lighthouse of faith. As she stepped inside, Paraskeva was enveloped by the familiar sense of incense and melted candle wax. Colored light streamed through stained glass windows, creating an almost otherworldly atmosphere, with multicolored beams piercing the fragrant haze. The icons, with their solemn golden gazes, seemed to look upon her with ancient wisdom as she moved through the sacred space. It was on that ordinary morning among the faithful of Epivates that Paraskeva's life would change forever. The priest, a man with a graying beard and a voice as deep as the sea, read the gospel with reverence. "Whoever wants to follow me must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me." The words cut through the incense-filled air and pierced directly into the girl's heart. Paraskeva felt something indescribable, as if a fire had been lit inside her chest. The world around her seemed to fade, and only those words echoed in her mind, over and over, like waves crashing endlessly on the shore. "Deny yourself, take up your cross, follow me." Silent tears ran down her cheeks as an overwhelming certainty settled deep within her soul. Her life no longer belonged to her. In that moment, beneath the colored light of the stained glass, surrounded by the murmur of prayers and the warmth of candle flames, Paraskeva gave her heart entirely to God. In the days that followed, her parents noticed a subtle change in their daughter. Always devout, Paraskeva now seemed to live in two worlds at once. Her body carried out the daily routines, but her eyes held a distant glow, as if constantly gazing beyond the visible horizon. She began waking before sunrise to pray, and was often found in the family's small chapel, kneeling in silence for hours. "What do you see when you pray for so long, my daughter?" her mother asked one day, puzzled by the girl's unusual devotion. Paraskeva smiled. her eyes reflecting the flame of the oil lamp that lit the icon of the Virgin Mary. "I don't see anything, Mama. I just listen." "And what do you hear?" The girl paused as if searching for words to describe the indescribable. "The silence of God," she finally answered. "It's like the sea on calm days, deep and full of secrets." Her mother didn't fully understand, but felt a mix of pride and unease. There was something different about her daughter, a calling that went beyond anything she herself had ever experienced in her faith. As Paraskeva grew, her outer beauty blossomed alongside her inner grace. By the age of 15, she was drawing admiring glances and marriage proposals. As the daughter of a wealthy family, blessed with natural elegance and radiant kindness, she was considered a highly desirable match. Though her parents respected her devotion, they began making plans for her future, discussing potential suitors and promising family alliances. But Paraskeva had already chosen her beloved years earlier in the church of her childhood. When her father mentioned the possibility of marrying the son of an allied merchant, she looked out the window toward the garden where the autumn roses were still in bloom, holding on against the approaching cold. "Father," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "my heart is already given. I cannot offer it to anyone else." The man frowned, confused. "Who are you speaking of, daughter? We know of no young man who has won your affection." "I speak of the one who created us," Paraskeva replied, turning to face her father with calm and resolute eyes. "Since that morning in church, when I heard the words of the gospel, I've felt the call to give my life entirely to God." A heavy silence filled the room. Paraskeva's father, a man of faith, but also practical and deeply concerned for his daughter's future, didn't know how to respond. Her mother, standing near the hearth, felt a single tear roll down her cheek. Somehow, she had always known this moment would come. "You're too young to make such a decision," her father finally said. "There are many ways to serve God, even as a wife and mother." "I know that, Father," Paraskeva answered with respect, "and I honor those who walk that path. But my heart is drawn to solitude, to silence, where I can hear God's voice more clearly. I feel it as strongly as I feel the blood flowing through my veins." The conversation continued for many nights, under the flickering glow of oil lamps, as autumn gave way to winter. Paraskeva's parents, though reluctant, slowly came to understand that their daughter's conviction was not a fleeting whim, but a deep calling, growing stronger with each passing day. When Paraskeva turned 18, a cruel blow of fate changed the course of her life. A devastating fever swept through Epivates, claiming many lives, including those of her beloved parents. Within just a few months, the young woman found herself orphaned and heir to a considerable fortune. The pain of loss ran deep, and she wept alone many nights, feeling the crushing weight of solitude. Yet even in the midst of her grief, she felt a quiet certainty. This was the moment to follow the call that had echoed in her heart for so many years. No longer facing her parents' gentle opposition, Paraskeva made a decision that shocked the local community. She gave away her entire inheritance to the poor, keeping only enough for a journey. Many relatives and family friends tried to dissuade her, insisting she was acting out of sorrow and impulse. "You'll regret this when the harshness of poverty becomes real," warned a concerned uncle. But Paraskeva simply smiled, a smile filled with peace and determination. "True wealth cannot be stolen or eaten by moths," she replied, quoting the scriptures she so deeply loved. On a spring morning, when the almond trees were in bloom and the air carried the scent of renewal, Paraskeva left Epivates. She carried only a small bundle of simple clothes, an icon she'd inherited from her mother, and a copy of the scriptures. Her destination, Jerusalem, the holy city, and then the desert of Jordan, where many ascetics before her had sought communion with God through solitude and silence. The journey was long and perilous for a young woman traveling alone. Crowded ships crossed turbulent seas. Merchant caravans traversed dusty roads. There were nights spent in the open under the vast star-covered sky. Along the way, Paraskeva encountered both kindness and suspicion, both help and hardship. But something in her gaze, a light from within that seemed to radiate outward, often disarmed even the roughest of travelers. On one particularly cold night, while the caravan she traveled with camped in the Anatolian mountains, a wounded wolf limped into the camp. The men sprang to their feet, grabbing weapons, ready to chase it off or kill it. But Paraskeva stood up calmly and walked toward the animal. The travelers watched in horror as she approached the predator. "She's gone mad!" one shouted. "Get back, woman!" another commanded. But Paraskeva kept walking, her steps steady, her eyes locked with the wolf's. The animal, limping from an injured front paw, paused and stared at her, growling low. She knelt just a few steps from him and extended her open hand, unafraid. "Come, brother wolf," she said softly. "Let me help you." To everyone's amazement, the wolf slowly approached her, sniffed her hand, and then lay down at her feet, exposing his injured paw. With gentle hands, Paraskeva removed a long thorn deeply embedded in the animal's flesh and cleaned the wound with water from her own flask, tearing a piece of her cloak to make a makeshift bandage. "How did you do that?" asked one of the merchants as she returned to the camp, the wolf now resting peacefully by the fire. "I didn't do anything," Paraskeva replied. "He simply sensed there was no malice in my heart. Animals are better than we are at sensing true intentions." The wolf stayed with the caravan for 3 days until his paw healed enough for him to hunt again. On the morning he left, he approached Paraskeva one last time, touching her face gently with his nose, a gesture that felt like both a blessing and a thank you. Then he vanished into the mountains, leaving behind a legend the merchants would tell for years to come. When Paraskeva finally arrived in Jerusalem, she felt overwhelmed by the almost tangible presence of sacred history. She walked the same streets that Jesus once walked, touched the same stones, breathed the same air, heavy with incense and prayer. For days she journeyed from one holy site to another, her heart overflowing with emotion and gratitude. But the call that had brought her this far was not to remain in the cities, even the holy ones. It was to the desert, to the deep silence where God's voice is clearest. And so, after a few weeks in Jerusalem, she continued on to the Jordanian desert, a harsh and unforgiving land that had been home to hermits and ascetics since the earliest centuries of Christianity. The transition from civilization to complete solitude was brutal. In the first days, Paraskeva questioned her decision as she battled the scorching heat by day and the piercing cold by night. Hunger was a constant companion, eased only by wild berries, roots, and occasionally a piece of bread shared by a kind traveler. Thirst was even more merciless, with water found only in rare springs and scattered oases. She found shelter in a small cave nestled among rocky slopes, near a spring of crystal-clear water, a miracle amid the surrounding dryness. There, far from human eyes and judgment, she established a simple and austere routine: prayer at dawn, foraging in the early morning, scripture meditation during the midday heat, manual labor in the afternoon, and evening prayers at sunset. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. Her body, once accustomed to comfort, adjusted to the ruggedness of the hermit life. Her skin, once soft and fair, darkened under the relentless sun. Her hands, once delicate, grew rough and strong, but as her outer self hardened, her inner self blossomed, as if the desert, paradoxically, had become the rain that nourished her soul. Over time, Paraskeva developed a special relationship with the nature around her. Animals that would normally flee from humans began to approach her. Desert mice ate from her hand, birds perched on her shoulders, and once a wounded deer, hunted by men, found refuge near her cave and stayed until it was fully healed. The few travelers who happened to cross her path began to speak of a young hermit whose eyes glowed with a supernatural light and whose very presence brought peace to even the most troubled heart. Some came seeking counsel, others came to share their sorrows, and some came just to feel, even for a moment, the tranquility that radiated from her like the warmth of a fire on a cold night. "How do you bear the loneliness?" asked a young monk once as he journeyed toward a distant monastery. Paraskeva looked out toward the horizon, where the sun was setting in shades of gold and crimson. "I am never truly alone," she answered. "The silence is full of God's presence. And nature, look around you. Every plant that grows between the rocks, every creature that finds its way through this seemingly lifeless desert, every star shining in the night sky, each one is a word of divine love. How could I feel alone when I'm surrounded by so much life and beauty?" Of course, there were times of trial, dark nights of the soul, when doubts attacked like hungry wolves, when faith felt like sand slipping through her fingers. Temptations whispered in her ear, reminding her of the comforts she had left behind, of the easier life she could have chosen. One of those nights was especially difficult. A sandstorm had risen, forcing her to remain hidden in the cave for days. Her supplies ran out, thirst became nearly unbearable, and the demon of despair settled heavily on her chest. "Why have you abandoned me here?" she cried out to the sky, now veiled by clouds of sand. "What am I doing in this forgotten place, far from everything and everyone?" The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the howl of the wind and the hiss of sand scraping against stone. Paraskeva collapsed to her knees, physically and spiritually drained, and then, just when her strength seemed completely gone, she felt a presence. Not something she could see or touch, but something that filled the cave the way perfume fills a room. A peace beyond all understanding wrapped around her like a cloak. In that moment, she understood. The desert wasn't just a place of trial, it was also a place of transformation. Every grain of sand that stung her skin, every freezing night, every day of hunger was a chisel shaping her soul, stripping away the unnecessary, revealing her truest self. The storm eventually passed, and when Paraskeva stepped out of the cave, the world felt reborn. The air was clean and clear, the sky a blue so deep it hurt to look at, and the few desert plants, though bent and battered, still reached stubbornly toward the sun. She realized then that she had survived her own inner storm, just like those resilient plants. After 5 years in the desert, a recurring dream began to trouble her sleep. In it, she saw herself returning to Constantinople, the great city she had only briefly passed through on her journey to the Holy Land. The dream was so vivid, so persistent, that Paraskeva began to wonder if it was a divine call toward a new chapter of her life. After much fasting and prayer, she decided it was time to leave her desert refuge. Her heart was torn between the peace she had found in solitude and the pull to return to the world. She packed her few belongings into a small bundle and set out. The return journey was just as grueling as the 1 year before, but Paraskeva was no longer the inexperienced girl who had once left Epivates. Her body had grown strong, her will had deepened, and her faith was now as solid as the mountains she now crossed. In Constantinople, the city of emperors, Paraskeva found a world in full motion. The metropolis was a melting pot of cultures, religions, and languages. Traders from distant lands, diplomats from friendly and hostile kingdoms, monks and scholars from many traditions. The churches were grand, almost overwhelming in contrast to the simplicity of the desert, with their golden mosaics, polished marble, and elaborate chants. At first, the city's chaos suffocated her. The constant noise, the mixed smells of spices, fish, incense, and waste, the crowd pressing through narrow streets, it was all an assault on her senses after years of silence and wide-open skies. But Paraskeva adapted, finding small moments of stillness in hidden gardens, lesser-known chapels, and along the shores of the Bosphorus at dawn. For 2 years, she remained in the imperial capital, dividing her time between solitary prayer and serving the most in need. In the poor neighborhoods, she cared for the sick, shared what little she had with the hungry, and offered words of hope to the hopeless. Her presence soon drew the attention of nobles and clergy, who were struck by this woman of simple appearance and deep gaze, whose hands bore both the toughness of the desert and the tenderness of compassion. "Who are you really?" a noblewoman once asked, watching Paraskeva tend to orphaned children. "The way you speak suggests a high education, but you live like the poor." Paraskeva smiled, her face glowing with a serenity that stood in stark contrast to the chaos around her. "I am only a servant, trying to follow in the master's footsteps," she replied, turning her eyes to a child playing with a stray cat. "See how that cat and child understand each other? They both know what it's like to have no place in the world. That's why they recognize one another. That's what we must learn to do, see Christ in every face we meet." During her second winter in Constantinople, Paraskeva had another dream, more vivid than all the others. In it, a voice as clear as spring water said to her, "It is time to return to the place where everything began. Your work is not finished, and your rest awaits in familiar soil." Without hesitation, Paraskeva knew. It was time to return to Epivates, the village of her childhood. She left Constantinople on a cold January morning as snowflakes danced in the air like white feathers. The journey was short compared to her previous travels, but each step toward home made her heart beat stronger. Epivates had changed little during her absence. The same stone houses lined the narrow streets, the same sea broke against the pebbled shore, the same church bell called the faithful to prayer. But Paraskeva, now 27, was no longer recognized by the villagers. Time and experience had transformed the once protected rich girl into a woman of simple appearance and eyes as deep as wells. Not wanting to attract attention, she rented a small room on the edge of the village and resumed her routine of prayer and service. During the day, she helped fishermen mend their nets, assisted women with their children, and lent her hands to the elderly with heavy tasks. At night, she withdrew to pray, sometimes walking barefoot to the shore to contemplate the sea beneath the starry veil. It was on one of those nights, as she walked along the beach, that she felt a sharp pain in her chest. The world around her seemed to spin, and Paraskeva collapsed onto the cold sand. As she struggled to breathe, she looked up to the sky, where the stars shone with an almost supernatural brilliance. "I'm ready," she whispered, not with fear, but with calm acceptance. A peace surrounded her like the waves gently washing her feet. Her eyes closed slowly, a soft smile formed on her lips, and Paraskeva left this world as quietly as she had lived in it. Her body was found the next morning by fishermen. Her face was peaceful, as if merely sleeping, with an expression of complete serenity that moved everyone. Not knowing who she was, the villagers gave her a simple burial in the local cemetery, an unmarked grave for a woman with no known name. But the story of Paraskeva would not end in the obscurity of an anonymous tomb. Years later, it is said that a monk passing through Epivates had an extraordinarily vivid dream. In it, a radiant figure pointed toward the cemetery and said, "There lies the body of the servant of God, Paraskeva. She returned to die where she was born, and her body remains incorrupt as a sign of the purity of her soul." Intrigued, the monk shared his dream with the local priest. Though skeptical at first, they decided to investigate. To their astonishment, when they exhumed the unknown woman's body, they found it perfectly preserved, exuding a sweet fragrance like spring flowers. News spread quickly, and soon her identity was revealed by former family servants who recognized the serene face as that of the young girl who had once given away her entire fortune to follow Christ. Reports of miraculous healings began to emerge among those who visited her remains, and the fame of her holiness spread throughout the empire. In the centuries that followed, the relics of Saint Paraskeva would be moved several times, first to Tarnovo, Bulgaria, then to Belgrade, Serbia, and finally to Iași, Romania, where they remain today. Every year, thousands of pilgrims visit her shrine seeking her intercession. But perhaps the true miracle of Saint Paraskeva lies not in her incorrupt body or the wondrous healings. Perhaps it lies in the simplicity of her choice, the courage of a young woman who gave up everything to follow a calling that only she could hear. In a world that glorifies wealth and display, her life remains a quiet testimony that true riches are found in surrender and true freedom in letting go. As the waves continue to kiss the shores of Epivates and the wind whispers through the trees of the Jordanian desert, the spirit of Paraskeva seems to echo through the ages, reminding us of the words that transformed her life. Whoever wants to follow me must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. Words that, on her lips and in her life, became not just a command, but a promise fulfilled. Prayer. O blessed Saint Paraskeva, you who heard the divine call from an early age and left behind earthly riches to follow Christ into the desert, teach us the path of true surrender. You who found God in the silence of solitude and in the beauty of creation, help us recognize His presence in moments of stillness. You who welcomed wild animals and comforted the suffering, cultivate in our hearts the same compassion that overflowed from yours. You whose body remained incorrupt as a sign of the purity of your soul, intercede for us before the heavenly throne, that we may live with the same simplicity and devotion that marked your brief but luminous journey on this earth. Guide us through trials, comfort us in our pain, and show us the way to holiness in the everyday moments of life, so that one day we may behold with you the face of the Lord you loved so deeply. Amen. My personal prayer. O Lord our God, with grateful hearts we lift our voices to thank you for the gift of life and the privilege of carrying forward your love through the stories that inspire and transform. We thank you, Father, for giving us the strength, the wisdom, and the courage to share the teachings of your gospel through this channel, which has become a beacon of hope and light in a troubled world. Lord, we acknowledge that every life is a precious gift, and we are grateful for every moment we are given to bear witness and spread your word. May each story told, each message of faith, and each divine lesson reach the hearts longing for love, truth, and reconciliation. We thank you for the inspiration that guides us, the blessings that multiply, and the opportunity to contribute to the spreading of Christianity, bringing the light of your love to those seeking direction and comfort. Through these stories, may we touch lives, strengthen faith, and build a community united in the pursuit of peace and the truth that only you can give. May your grace continue to shine upon us, and may we become instruments of your mercy and compassion, reflecting the beauty of your love in every word and every gesture. In the name of Jesus, our Savior, we thank you for allowing us to be part of this sacred mission. Amen. The story of Saint Paraskeva reminds us that true wealth is not found in material things, but in the spiritual treasures we discover when we faithfully follow our divine calling. This young woman, who gave up a life of comfort to follow Christ in the desert of Jordan, proves that genuine faith fears no challenge or hardship. In a world that constantly pushes us to accumulate and display possessions, Paraskeva offers a powerful counterpoint: the freedom found in simplicity and the transforming power of surrender. Her special connection to nature and animals teaches us that when we empty our hearts of worldly concerns, we make space to recognize the divine in all creation. The legacy of this saint, whose relics continue to draw thousands of pilgrims to Iași, transcends borders and centuries. Her life invites us to reflect deeply. What would we be willing to let go of to follow our own spiritual path? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel Journey of the Saints, sacred stories to discover more transformative lives that illuminate our path of faith. Share this video with friends and family who might be inspired by the courage and purity of heart of Saint Paraskeva, and show your support by leaving a like. And now, we'd love to hear from you. Which part of Saint Paraskeva's life inspired you the most? Was it her courage to give up everything, her connection to nature, or her perseverance in the solitude of the desert? Tell us in the comments. Before you go, watch one of the videos recommended above, hand-picked to help you continue your journey through the sacred stories that have transformed lives for centuries.